Okay, so yes, as Daniel said, my name is Ben Ilegbodu, and I'm here to talk about React and ES6 and beyond, which I call ES.next, my two favorite topics to talk about. So actually, who has used React before? Hands. Okay, it's a good number of hands. So I like React because it's a very narrow framework. In fact, it's not even really a framework, it's a library. So you do a little bit of stuff in React, but then most of what you're doing is actually just regular JavaScript, which is why I like it, because it's something that can be ported across libraries. So if I try to do something else besides React, a lot of my code can still exist. And most of that code is actually written in ES6. So who has used ES6 before? Okay, great number of people. That's good. So there will be some things for sure that in this talk that you've seen before if you've used ES6, but then hopefully there'll be lots of new things as well. So actually, before we go any further, can I have everybody stand up? I want everybody to stand up. So we had lunch, it's that mid-afternoon malaise that we got going on. So if you're able and willing to stand up, what we're going to do is just do a couple of stretching exercises so we can just warm ourselves up. I don't want anybody falling asleep during my talk because I'll feel bad. Okay, so if you're able, what we're going to do is we're just going to do 10 calf raises, just like this, okay? And you can put your arms down, just stretch out as much as you can. So let's do 10 all together. I'll count. Ready? 1, 2, 3, feel that burn. 4, nice stretching. 5, 6, 7, 8, we're almost there. 9, and 10. And before you sit down, I want you to turn to people around you, introduce yourselves as well. Somebody you don't know. Just say hello to your neighbor. Okay, I think we're well enough acquainted. Perfect, you have a seat. So now, when you're giving a review for this talk, you can say you got at least 2 things out of it. You got some exercise, and you got to meet some people you didn't know, okay? So 2 things. I hope there'll be more things that you learn. Okay, so continuing on. What this talk is not about first, just going to set things up. So it's not why to use React. I'm not even going to go into how to develop in React that much. The purpose of this talk is to find out about how we can use ES6 in React. So I'm not going to also go into all the details about ES 2015 and beyond, because we'd be talking about 60 plus features and only have 45 minutes. I don't want to bore you to death. And as well, I'm not going to talk about how to transpile as well. Luckily, Naomi did a great job talking about Webpack, and that's basically how you would transpile it. So you've kind of already learned about that. But what this is about learning ES 2015, ES6, ES7, and then what will be ES 2016, or it was ES 2017 rather, and how we can apply that knowledge of JavaScript in our React code. And I'm going to be showing a whole bunch of code as we go through. So if you're the type of person that likes to jot down a whole lot of notes, I suggest you just put your pen down and kind of lean back and kind of take it all in. I have a link to the slides at the bottom here on the screens, a bit.ly link. So if you want the slides, they're right there, as well as I tweeted out a link to the slides already. So if you go to BenMVP on Twitter, you can find a link to the slides there. Okay, so let's jump right in. First, I'll introduce myself formally again. So like I said, I'm Ben Ilegbodu. I'm a Christian, a husband, and a father. This is my wife, Rashida. We've been married for a little over 6 years, and it's our 2 daughters, Simone and Avery. Simone is going to be 3 in March, and Avery's going to be 5 months in a couple of days. And we live out in the Bay Area, California, San Francisco. So not actually in San Francisco, but outside of San Francisco, because San Francisco is way too expensive. So an hour outside of there, but I commute in. And I work at Eventbrite. So hopefully all of you guys have heard of Eventbrite before because you bought your tickets on Eventbrite. So thank you very much for that. I appreciate that. I am the front end manager and senior UI engineer on our team. And we have been recently transitioning our Backbone Marionette app over to React. So a lot of what I'm talking about today is kind of that experience. We've been teaching people React and then also at the same time teaching them ES.6. So how they can apply all that knowledge into their React applications. And then lastly, I'm a huge basketball fan. So I love watching basketball. I love playing basketball, although now with my family, it's mostly a lot of watching of basketball that happens. And I'm from Houston, so my favorite team is the Houston Rockets. But one of my goals is to visit all of the basketball arenas in the United States. So I'm here in New York, and you guys are actually playing a team today, the Charlotte Hornets, so I'm actually going to go to the game. I'm super excited about going to Madison Square Garden, not actually watching the Knicks, but that's okay. I'm sorry for you Knicks fans. Maybe next year. Okay. So here's our agenda. I'm going to talk about 12 different features. I've broken them down into 2 sections. The top section, the green, is features that you would most likely use directly in your React components. So when you're making React components, you'd be using this as you're rendering your components. Then the bottom ones are the features you would be using in kind of like your data APIs or your helper functions that you'd be calling from your React components. So let's, so one other thing is that the examples I'm showing are kind of based on this application, a simple comment form that was used in the original React tutorial when they're teaching React. So basically you have a comment form, it lists all the comments, and then at the bottom is a form where you add a comment and then it gets added to the list up top. So kind of keep that into your mental model. Okay, so let's jump in. So in the original ES5 code that the React tutorial was written in, it was all one file that was included as a script tag in the page. So we had globals that were included as well. So React DOM, which is what you need for React, and then a library called Remarkable that changes markdown text into HTML, and then jQuery. So then we had this one file, and it had all of our React components in there. 4 components that you can see: comment list, comment form, and app. And then finally rendering the actual app component down into the DOM. So as you can see, the comment component depends on the Remarkable library, but gonna implicitly just uses it. It doesn't import it or anything like that. And the other components depend on things as well. So we have our components. React is naturally modularized, but we're not actually putting all the components in separate files. But now with ES6, we have something called modules, which Naomi talked a lot about in her Webpack talk. So now we can have separate files for each one of our React components. So for instance, the comment component, it depends on React. It depends on Remarkable. So it just imports them using ES6 imports. And then it declares the component like normal, like we saw before, and then it exports it, export default. So that was similar to the module.exports equals that Naomi was showing with common.js style. And then we have similarly the comment list component at the bottom. It depends on React as well as our comment component from before. So we just import it using a relative path and export it default as well. I'll skip the comment form for now because we'll deep dive into that component later. But we have the app component, which is the major component that includes comment list as well as comment form, and imports those, and then exports it. And then finally, our index.js, which is the entry, which is what I would point Webpack to, imports app, React DOM, React, and then renders in there. So actually in this React app, the only thing that touches the DOM is index.js. Everything else are just React components. So this is nothing really spectacular, right? This is just like normal modularization. If you've used Python, if you've used PHP, any kind of language, this is natural stuff. This is JavaScript catching up with other languages, in my opinion. Okay, so we got the modules. So we're kind of all on a common base. And now we have the declarations of our components. So in ES5, React had something that it started off with called react.createClass. And that's how you would create your React component. And you would pass in this huge object literal that'll help you define what the different properties of the class are. So we're passing in a prop types object that React will use, get initial state method, private handle submit method that I'm only making private because I have an underscore in front of it, just a convention. And then the main render method in the React component, which renders out the JSX. So this is how you did do it in ES5. We're kind of creating a class using a class factory, which is what react.createClass is. But now in ES6, we can move to more standard syntax of classes. So we actually get a class keyword as well as an extends keyword. So you define your class by saying class and the name of the class, and then you can extend anything by naming that thing that you want to extend. So classes still work the same way in JavaScript. They're still prototypal inheritance. And actually, this will get transpiled down to prototypal inheritance, but it's now a nice, more friendly syntax in order to define your class and to extend classes. So with the syntax in ES6, we have, this is what you can do. You can define a special method called the constructor, and it has a super keyword in there that you can use to call base class of methods or base class constructor. You can also define static methods as well by putting the static keyword in front of a method and then just normal methods. So there's no more function keyword or anything like that, just the name of the method and then parentheses for the arguments. So now when we look at our React component transformed into ES6, it looks like this. So we have class, the name of the class, which is comment form, and then extends react.component. So in order for React to support ES6 classes, they have to actually create a class called react.component that you could extend from. And then now in our constructor, instead of get initial state, I can just set the state directly. So this is now an instance property inside of my class. And then define handle submit, which is a helper method, and then render as well. So notice no more function keywords in there. And then you'll notice at the bottom, prop types is actually a static property that's attached to the class that's common across all classes. So the way to assign it is I do comment form after the declaration of it and assign prop types to that, which is kind of unfortunate because now the prop types, the static property is defined outside of the context of the class, not inside of it. And if you also notice, this.state is assigned inside the constructor. So the only way you kind of know that state is an instance property of the class is by looking inside the constructor or other methods. There's no declarative way with ES6 classes to declare what your properties are. But there is a proposal that's coming in a future version of ECMAScript. So ECMAScript 2017 will be releasing later this year, and it'll have several features in it. And actually, the reason why it's called ES 2017 and not ES8 is because the standards body moved to a yearly cadence for when they're releasing versions of ECMAScript. So now instead of waiting 5 years, 10 years until a new version releases, they're going to release something every year, and they have a proposal process. So there are 4 stages of this process, and once a feature reaches stage 4, which means that it was implemented in at least 2 browsers and the full spec has been written, then it'll be in the next version of JavaScript that's going to release. So this feature that I'm going to show you right now is currently sitting at stage 2, which means that only one interpreter has implemented it yet. So it's waiting for another to move into stage 3. But this feature, what it allows is now a declarative way to declare, a way to declare properties. So you can say static prop types at the top, just like you did static methods, but now it's a property. And you can also declare state as a property as well inside the class. So now all the properties are there declaratively. So I'm hoping that this feature, because I use this all the time, will will actually make it into ES 2018, so next year. So it has some time to make it there. But actually, you can use these features now ahead of time by using tools called like Babel that allow you to use features before they exist in the actual spec. Okay, so now that we have comment form as a component defined, we can now use more features of modules, actually. So before we were using, if I go back one step, here, we were using React.component, a property on the React class. But now when I'm importing it, I can actually just import component directly within React. So it's a named import as a sub-property of React module. And then similarly, because I no longer have to add prop types at the end of the component, it's declared statically inside the class, I can just export default class comment form immediately without having to do multiple lines. Okay, and then one last thing now that I can do with this is make the initial state a constant, because you haven't seen the full implementation of comment form, but we're going to be reusing this value initialization multiple times. So when we initialize the component, we want to set the state to that, but also when the comment form is submitted, we want to reset it. So we'll be setting the state back to this value. So now I pull it out as a constant outside of the comment form. But it's called, I'm saying it's a constant, but it's actually a variable. There's nothing that prevents me from reassigning initial state to anything in my app until something called block scoping is introduced in ES6. And what that now allows is the const keyword. So the const keyword now says that this binding initial state cannot be reassigned once it's assigned the first time. And I actually have to assign something initially to it, or else that's an error too. But one unique thing about const, though, is that the assignment, the binding, is constant. The value can still be mutated. So since this is an object, I can remove properties from it. I can change the values of properties in it, and I can also add properties to it. So you would have to use something like object.freeze to make sure that the value couldn't be mutated, or use a library like immutable or something like that. But also with const, we have another keyword that I'm going to introduce, but let me first kind of explain the problem. So this is a handle submit method, and it gets an event variable. And usually when you get the event variable, the first thing you want to do is prevent default so that the default handling of form submission doesn't happen. So ideally, e.prevent default would happen as the first line in the function, but we shouldn't put it as the first line. We actually have to declare our variables as the first line because of something called variable hoisting. And I actually don't have time to go into what variable hoisting is, but I have a link at the top where I mentioned variable hoisting that you can go to a nice long MDN article that explains what variable hoisting is if you don't know. So we have a lot of rules like ES.lint to make us declare our variables at the top so that we don't run into variable hoisting. It's something that 95% of the time doesn't really matter, but the 5% that you do run into it, it'll really pull your hair out. So we declare our variables at the top. But now with let in ES6, we no longer are susceptible to variable hoisting. We can actually declare our variables wherever we want, and the interpreter won't automatically move them to the top of the function like it does with var. So I don't really consider let a feature of ES6. I consider it actually a bug fix, because this is really how declarations, in my opinion, should have worked from the beginning. But now we have a new problem that I want to tackle inside of this code. So if you look at it, we're declaring the author variable as well as the text variable and assigning values directly from this.state with the exact same name. So it seems like there's some duplication going on there. It'd be nice if there was a way to shorten that. And we can do that with a feature called Destructuring. Nice, funny name. So I want to take a pause and kind of just warn you, if you haven't used Destructuring before, it's a little interesting. It's probably one of the most challenging features of ES6 syntax that I find people struggle with. So I just want to warn you that you're probably going to feel like this when I first show you destructuring, okay? But I promise you, if you keep using destructuring over and over, and after I explain it to you, I feel like you'll move more to this with destructuring. This is how I feel about destructuring, and I try to use it all the time, okay? So this is what the new code looks like right here. I'll let you take a look for a second. So now the statement is one line. This dot state is assigned into author and text. Let's zoom into it so I can kind of explain it a little bit. So before we had the two lines that were declaring author and text. Now we have one line that's doing it. So what we have here is what's called an object literal pattern. So it's called a pattern because it's on the left side of the assignment. Instead of being an object literal, that would be on the right side of the assignment. That would actually be creating an object. So what this is saying is that taking the object that's on the right side of the assignment, this dot state, I want to take a property in that object called author, create a variable also with the same name called author, and then assign the value from the object into the variable. And similarly, do the same thing for text. A property in this dot state called text, create a variable called text, assign this dot state dot text into that value. So that's kind of the real shorthand version of it. You can also do something more fancy if you actually want to create a variable that's named something that's different than the property in the object. And that's what you can see in the bottom example. So what the example at the last line is saying is that there's a property in this dot state called author, create a variable named author name, and then assign into that. And similarly, create a variable called full text, pull out the property text from it, and assign it that way. So what you can actually do, you can take this a step further and move object destructuring into function headers. So not just in variable assignments, but in function headers, and now you can simulate named parameters. So at the bottom is a way that you can declare a stateless function in React. So all it does is just return JSX based upon the props that were passed to it. And the props are an object of different properties. So in the bottom example, looking at the body of the code, I can see that we're using props.style and props.content. But if you look at the top example, the properties or the props object gets destructured immediately. So now all you have are style and content parameters. There is no props object. So you immediately have style and content to use in your code. So not only is this shorter, it actually is more explicit as to what's going on in the code. All you can know from the function header that all you have access to is style and content. So if you're passing an object, all you need to know is that I need to pass in style and content. So it's a little bit more clear as well as being more concise. Okay, so new problem here. Moving away from destructuring, can anybody spot the bug in this code? So what was that? Yes, there's a problem with this set state, actually, because this is undefined inside of the function. So if you're new to JavaScript, any newbie is just like, why? Why is this undefined? And you get it in your console and you don't know why. And it's undefined in strict mode, or it would be the window object in unstrict mode, loose mode, I guess. And even if you're a seasoned JavaScript developer, sometimes you might run into this case. And once again, I don't have time to explain what this is. So I have a link to another MDN article that explains what this is. But yes, it's undefined. So what we've done in the past to fix this, in ES3, what we would do is declare a variable and set this outside of the function. So we would store a reference. And that reference could be M, it could be that, it could be self, like I have in this example. I've seen somebody actually name it selfie, but it doesn't matter what it's named. It just, you have that reference to the variable. And then inside of the callback function, you have access to this. But now every time you have a callback function, you have to store this all the time in the top of your methods. In ES5, we got the bind function, or the bind method, that you can add to functions so that you can pass the proper this context into it, as well as doing currying if you like doing that as well. But we pass it in. And this works, but it's a little bit verbose and kind of cumbersome. So now with ES6, we get arrow functions. So arrow functions do two things for us. They give us a shortened syntax. So no longer do we have function : inside of our code. And then they also pass the proper this context. So they do something called what's called lexical scoping. So the value of this inside of the function is the same value of this outside of the function. So you don't have to worry about that anymore. So the arrow functions are basically, like I said, remove the function keyword and the colon, and you just have the parentheses around the parameters, a literal arrow, so a fat arrow, equal sign, greater than sign, and then the function body, like that. So arrow functions basically work how you would expect them to work. But they actually have a lot of different permutations as well. So if you only have a single parameter, you can omit the parentheses. But if you have no parameters or you have multiple parameters, then you need to have the parentheses. And then if the function body is only one statement and is going to return a value, then you can omit the curly braces. However, if you have no statements, or if you have one statement that's not going to return a value, as well as multiple statements, then you need to have curly braces around the function body. And I actually want to point you out to the last example there. That's our stateless function again, now rewritten as an arrow function, using destructuring inside of the function header. So you can kind of combine all of these different features together to make something that's concise, but I feel still readable if you understand how the different features work. Okay, so back to our original handle submit to talk about a new problem here. So on the second to the last line, you see it says this.props.on comment submit, and then it passes a big object that we're passing to it. And that object has two parameters, two properties, author and text, and we're assigning the values of variables with the same name, author and text. So ES6 is kind of all about allowing us to write shorter syntax. And now with enhanced object literals, we can just write a little less code. So there are multiple features of enhanced object literals. And the first feature is something that's called object literal shorthand. So when the name of the property that you want to pass is the same as the variable, then you don't have to include the variable name. It'll just know and look up and find a variable with that name. And if it doesn't find it, then it'll throw an error. So you can just write a little bit of less code with that. Another feature of enhanced object literals is what I'll show you right now in this example. So this is the old way you would do it. If you wanted to, this is a function that's going to call set state, but it's going to be dynamic. It doesn't know what key it's going to use. The key of the object that it's going to pass in is passed into the function. So what you'd have to do is create an empty object, index into that object with the variable that you want, and then assign the value as we're doing here. But now with ES6, we have something called object literal computed keys, and you can just create the object literal in one go. You don't have to create it first and then assign it. You can just put the brackets in the key, and then it'll be computed that way. So it's no different than what it was before, just a little less code to have to write, just one step. Okay, and in this example, here's another feature. So this is a join function, and this join function, it works similar to array.join, except it's a function that first takes the separator as the first parameter, and then an unlimited number of parameters afterwards. And it uses the arguments keyword to be able to do that. But as we know, or as we've run into, the arguments keyword is not an actual array. It's just array-like. So it has length. You can index into it, but you can't do anything else to it. So this is how you would have to kind of solve the join. What we really want is, back in this example, after separator, we would want another parameter that was basically everything after the separator. because right now it looks like join only takes one parameter. So with the REST operator, you just put 3 dots in front of a parameter, and now that parameter becomes an array of the rest of the values, essentially. So you have separator as the first parameter, and then tic-tac-toe will be the 3 values inside values. And now since it's a real array, you can just call join on it, and we're done. And you can actually apply object destructuring with the REST operator and a feature that's coming soon in ES6 or ES in ECMAScript as well. It's sitting at stage 3, so I'm hoping it will be available next year, or officially available next year. So what you can do is you have this.props, it's an object. I know that I want to destructor type and default value out of it, but I want an object of the rest of the stuff. Basically like doing a lodash omit, essentially. And now input props now has everything but those 3 things, all in syntax. So you could do it with the lodash, but now it's just JavaScript, vanilla JavaScript. Okay, so those were all of the features that were relevant to components. I'm going to quickly go through the features that are relevant to data APIs. So this is math.max. It takes arbitrary number of parameters that you can pass to it. Here I'm passing 33, 2, and 9. But if I had an array of values and I want to get the max of that, I have to do some JavaScript jujitsu, I guess I'll call it, using apply. And most people don't know about apply and call. They allow you to do a lot of fancy things, but it's not normal programming with JavaScript, I guess I'll say. But now with something called the spread operator, 3 dots, similar to the REST operator, it will now take that array and spread it out as individual parameters in the function call. So it's as if I called math.max with 33, 2, 9. So it spreads those values out. So since the spread operator and the REST operator look the same, I have this kind of comparison for you. So the spread operator takes an array and spreads it out to multiple parameters, and you use it in a function call. Whereas the REST operator takes multiple parameters and coalesces them into a single array, and you use it in a function header. So they're kind of 2 sides of the same coin, but they use the same 3 dots. So the main way I use the spread operator is not really kind of how I showed it with the math.max. I use it to maintain immutability, which is highly important or highly recommended, I guess I'll say, with React development. So you never want to mutate an object. You never want to push onto an array or assign something to an object. You want to basically create a new object and add the array, or create a new array and add the array that you had before. So in this example, I have 2 arrays, start and end, parts of the musical scale, and now I'm creating a new array that's the whole scale by spreading on start. So now I have do, re, mi in the array literal, and then fa, so, and then now spreading on the end, la, ti to it. So I'm able to create a new array without having to push. So it'd be similar to doing the concat, like I show in the bottom example, but all in syntax. And now another feature that's in stage 3 is doing the same thing, but with objects. So it's just like lodash assign or object.assign that's also a part of ES6. It's just syntax. So now I can create an object by spreading on an existing object and then adding to it that way. Side note, I was in Oklahoma City giving this talk, and I showed this example, and they almost booed me off the stage. So if you're a basketball fan, you know exactly why they weren't too happy about this example. But anyway, it went over great when I did it in the Bay. So that same example of spread is also, you can use it in JSX. So it's not part of JavaScript, but if you have a component, when you hear I'm declaring the input DOM element in JSX, I can just spread an object into it, so I don't have to actually define each one of the attributes of it right there, which is pretty helpful if you don't know what's in input props, for instance. Okay, so I knew I would be running out of time at this point, so I'm kind of just going to run through these rest of these. So there's something called promises that exist now in ES6. So if you've used jQuery deferreds, for instance, they're similar to that. And the fetch API came to the web standards at the same time. So instead of doing $.ajax or creating your own XML HTTP request object, I don't know why you would use it by yourself, but now you can use the fetch API. And it's a promise-based API, so you can use then and catch in order to make requests. So I have links there. You can check those out as well. Also, there are default parameters now in ES6. So just like in other languages as well, but the default values don't have to be primitive values. They can be complex expressions. They can be function calls. They can be objects. You can even use a previous parameter in the expression of a following parameter as well, as I've shown in this example. And then finally, the string API comes with a lot of helper new methods like ends with, includes, and starts with. So you no longer have to do index of and compare it to -1 anymore, which will be great. The array API has some helpful things like find and includes as well, which help with similarly to that. So here's our recap. Talked about these 12 things. Kind of cheated, only really talked about the first 8 things. But I gave you links to the other 4 so you can read up on those as well. And I created a repo that basically transformed the old React tutorial that was written in ES5 into ES6. And I did all the steps and the different things that I explained. So step 1 was modules, step 2 is classes, step 3 is block scoping. So if this was intriguing to you, you want to see some code actually doing it, the full app transformed over and over and over, you can check out the repo there. And I have additional resources that you can also check out as links as well. I wrote a whole blog series basically on ES6. So if you want to learn more about any of those features, you can check that out as well. Okay. So last, I just wanted to finish with a couple of shout outs. Wanted to shout out BuzzJS for having me here and inviting me to speak and share my knowledge about React and ES6. And I don't know if you know that there's a whole lot that goes into running a conference. And now that I've been speaking at conferences, I kind of get a little bit of an insight as to what it is to be an organizer of this conference. And we have 2 great organizers here, Manon and Daniel, who've done a great job. And usually organizers are behind the scenes. So I wanted to give a hand clap to them for the amazing job that they're doing. It's a labor of love for them, just kind of help the New York JavaScript community. So thank you very much. Also want to thank Eventbrite for allowing me to be here. Today is a work day and I'm not at work. And I'm not on vacation either. I'm not using vacation days, I should say. So they're really supportive of me going out and sharing as well. Of course, it helps their brand as well. But, you know, they're supportive of me and my career development as well. And then lastly, thank you to all of you guys for being here and listening. I know this was a single track, so you had no choice basically to listen to me. But, you know, there's not too many people asleep, not too many people left. So thank you very much for that. Thank you. So I believe I have time for questions. Anybody have any questions for me? Over there. Got to shoot a mic his way. Okay. I think she'll still want you to have it.
Hey, so as a Spurs fan, I have to ask, what are the odds the Rockets are going to make it to the finals?
Well, if you would ask me that question 2 weeks ago, I would have said it was really, really high. And then we went on a crazy losing streak. So I don't know. The Warriors are looking pretty good, but I still have faith in the Rockets. This will be our year.
Back to that.
Back to the actual topic.
Great. Love the presentation. In terms of React in relationship with TypeScript, can you elaborate on that?
In TypeScript,
I don't use React, but I'm actually curious about.
So I haven't used React with TypeScript. What's common with React is actually a different typing language called Flow. So it's similar to TypeScript, but kind of has different genesis. So people do use TypeScript with React. I have a friend who's doing that. And it works, I guess, similarly to anything else. You just type your classes and say what props they take in and things like that. So it should work, but there's a bigger community of React and Flow than React and TypeScript. Yeah.
You said at the beginning of your talk that you were using the term ES.next. Just that was your terminology. Now, I've seen other people use ES.next as well. Is there a common meaning for that term?
Yeah, that's kind of what it's become, ES.next, and kind of starting with ES6 and beyond has been called ES.next.
Okay.
So yeah, ES6 plus or things like that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
You mentioned in the beginning of the slide you were using Backbone and then you moved over to React. Like how with Vue, Angular 2, even as we have a conversation next, like what made you decide to use React? Or like I don't know if you made that decision or
there was a lot of so I would say that the Bay Area is very React heavy. Everybody's all about React, probably because Facebook is in the Bay Area. So that was part of it. And then a lot of people at Eventbrite were really excited about it as well. Vue wasn't as popular as it was when we started looking at it. And Angular has I guess I'll say a negative connotation in the Bay Area for whatever reason, but people just don't like it. So that was kind of the main reason for it. Yeah. If I were doing it now, maybe we would look at Vue or maybe Preact or some other variations of it, but yeah.
So in general, when would you say that it's safe to start using an ES.next feature that hasn't reached stage 4 for enterprise software?
Yeah. So the suggestion that I've seen from people is stage 3 or higher, because if you're using anything that's in stage 2 or stage 1, the feature could drastically change basically as interpreters start building on top of it or building it. But by stage 3, something has been has been implemented by 2 interpreters, so it's likely not to change that great. So that's the suggestion basically, because the worry is that if you use something that's in stage 1 or stage 0, even it could drastically change. You have to change all your code.
You were talking about variable hoisting and sort of getting around that. And I know a lot of developers kind of declare all their variables at the top of a function.
Yeah.
They just like that, for organizational purposes as well. Do you find yourself now not doing that, or do you still kind of declare your lets at the top of the function still?
Yeah. If it's something that doesn't depend on code that was further in, like after an if statement, then I'll put it at the top still. But if I have an if or I need to do something first and then declare a variable, something that's based on something that happened earlier, then I won't just declare the let and then assign it later. I hate that. So now I just fight against it because I know I don't have to worry about variable hoisting. So excited about it. So, okay, I think that's going to be the last. Oh, we have one more question? Okay, so if you have any more questions, though, you can tweet at me at BenMVP or even email me, or I call it snail email now. I also have a GitHub AMA, so if you want to post issues there, I can answer questions and stuff like that. And we have a break right after this as well, so you can come by and ask me questions as well.
So we have some snacks out back. First of all, let's hear it for Ben. That was a really great talk. Thanks.